John Kreese versus Terry Silver. Both are the founders of Cobra Kai, but despite fighting for the same side, their ideologies differ from one another. But who's overall right, and what is the best style for the next generation in the long run? Well, let's find out. To first break this down, we must first look at Kreese's way of karate. Initially in Karate Kid, we see him believing in the classic strike first, strike hard, and no mercy. Pretty straightforward stuff, but we see in Cobra Kai that there's a little more to it. With Kreese basically being a soldier stuck in present time, still believing in military tactics to help him become stronger. In Kreese's eyes, this is what's best for kids, and kids must prepare for anything because in the real world, it's either you or your opponent. Now, this doesn't sound so bad at first glance, but we see clearly that Kreese is taking this idea to the extreme, literally strangling his own student after losing a fight. And in general, Kreese is just very harsh, but in his eyes, it's for a good cause. But it's clear that back in the 80s, that Kreese is just simply unhinged, and this is when Kreese gets dropped on his skull by Miyagi and then goes homeless. He would then rely on Silver for help, who helps him get back on his feet and introduces a different style of Cobra Kai. I'm gonna dub this as Quicksilver Karate. Quicksilver Karate essentially is a far more violent form of fighting that allows the user to essentially turn your own fear into a weapon, and essentially removing fear as a concept entirely. This seemingly doesn't sound so bad in contrast to Kreese's style, who's all about channeling your anger and using it against your opponent, but we see this to not be the case. Removing fear and utilizing it as a weapon is shown to be far more deadly physically and psychologically to opponents, since we see how Terry makes Daniel feel invincible just to bring down the dude Terry saved him from to humiliate him. Without the concept of fear in mind, you have the power to pull other people's fears against them, making Terry feel like the ultimate loose cannon. However, Kreese back then was very unhinged, so he didn't mind this, but we see these two styles come to a clash in season 4. Before talking about that though, we have to acknowledge that Kreese himself does go through a change and is consumed with guilt after losing everything he had. Him taking Cobra Kai from Johnny in the end of season 2 isn't him being a bad guy and lying to the viewers all along. He's doing what's best for Johnny in his eyes, trying to bring him back into the game. And if we are being realistic, Kreese's way of fighting would have stopped this from happening. We also see Kreese's style helping Robbie out in the real world, showing Kreese's style to not just only be applicable in a military-like situation. And for Tori's case, along with other kids who have it rough, Kreese's way of karate to some people is the only way to get by. It just really depends on the person, and we see Kreese after getting dropped on his head going to Terry for help, who we see actually in a peaceful point in his life. And this is sort of interesting because he's gotten therapy and recovered from what he was in the 80s, and he actually seems somewhat sane. However, Kreese decides to put the idea in his head that maybe the karate, instead of corrupting Terry in his eyes, defined who he was. Now, this might just be Kreese's fault due to him bringing this version of Terry back, but in all honesty, Kreese's expectations were for his friend to bring back what Cobra Kai was back in the 80s. Rather, Terry at first was trying to make Cobra Kai somewhat reputable, having revenge not being taken place and let Cobra Kai being walked all over, and essentially just trying to be better from his past self, but Kreese would go on to show to Terry that he needs to start following his Cobra Kai way. And for the first time, we see that Kreese induced something Terry hasn't really felt in a long time, that being fear. After this confrontation with Kreese, Terry would proceed to fall back into his old ways and begin to manipulate Robbie to get to Johnny. And he does all of this just so he could beat him up in front of Kreese. However, while doing this, accidentally he would discover Kreese's actual weakness, that being Johnny Lawrence. And in the same moment of discovery, he too realizes that his fear of Kreese simply blinds him from the truth, and that is, deep down, Cobra Kai doesn't need Kreese in order to continue. And the thing is that when Terry says that Kreese's weakness is Johnny Lawrence, it really does go a long way and, in my opinion, really enhances what Kreese has gone through over the course of Cobra Kai. Because we see him fixing up Johnny's trophy, and we also see him trying to do better genuinely, but then also seeing at the same time that Johnny got way too soft and he's gonna have to intervene. And mind you, Kreese is ruthless and never gives anyone second chances, but how many chances has he given Johnny at this point? Anyways, Terry has already begun to show the next generation his style of Cobra Kai and how having fear is nothing but a chain that holds you back. So instead, Terry picks up that same chain and uses it as a weapon. He would beat up Stingray and frame Kreese for a crime he didn't even commit, and then pay the All Valley ref to essentially find any way he can to get Cobra Kai the win, which he manages to do. And instead of being consumed by fear and being a second to Kreese, he went where the fear was located to remove it entirely, and now is channeling it as a weapon, which perfectly sets up Terry as an even more loose cannon than in comparison to before, while also concluding his conflict with Kreese once and for all. Now, to say who actually was in the right is a very weird discussion due to some technicalities. You see, Kreese should be in the wrong due to not only bringing Terry in the first place, but then getting removed from the show by him. And we also see that Terry's way of fighting is technically more effective, but Kreese's way of karate is shown to be far better for people morally and overall benefits the weak become stronger. Meanwhile, Terry Silver's way is just the definition of, yeah, it gets the job done, but you could just get it done in any other way. Terry's way of fighting is very brutal, but it literally allowed him to rise from the top and become a bigger menace than ever before. Technically, Terry is right, but he's wrong, like what Falcon said.